Let's begin with a structural overview. Welcome to another lecture. Today we consider Ludwig van Beethoven, a German composer and pianist whose career, if you will, forms the bridge between the classical and romantic eras. I am Professor Alexei, and with me is Priyanka, whose questions tend to locate the heart of the matter rather efficiently.
Thank you, Professor. Hello everyone. I am excited to listen and hopefully ask helpful questions along the way.
To frame our discussion, it's important to understand what we mean when we place Beethoven at the hinge of musical history. Baptized in December 1770 in Bonn and active for most of his adult life in Vienna, he started as a virtuoso pianist who captivated salons with improvisation. Then, as progressive hearing loss advanced, his center of gravity shifted decisively toward composition. The result was a catalog that enlarged the symphony, reinvented chamber music, and in the Ninth Symphony, introduced a choral finale of unprecedented scope into the symphonic domain. Some operative terms. A symphony is a multi-movement orchestral work. A string quartet is music for two violins, viola, and cello. A sonata is a multi-movement structure for solo or duo instruments. And a choral symphony, as the Ninth demonstrates, integrates vocal soloists and chorus within the symphonic frame. These are not mere labels. They are frameworks that Beethoven stretched to previously unimaginable expressive and architectural dimensions. With these definitions in mind, we can consider how he stretched them.
So, I guess when we say he transformed forms, we mean scale, and also the kind of rhetoric the music carries. Not just longer pieces, but more intense arguments inside them.
Precisely. We observe in the Eroica and the Fifth a motivic economy that drives vast spans. In the Razumovsky quartets and the late quartets, we hear counterpoint and harmonic boldness reconfigured. And in the Hammer-Clavier Sonata or the Diabelli variations, we see the keyboard writing become encyclopedic, even metaphysical in scope. Fundamentally, form became vehicle for an enlarged interiority. Why it matters today is not mysterious. His works remain among the most performed globally. Concert programs return repeatedly to the Fifth, Seventh, and Ninth Symphonies, to piano sonatas like the Pathétique, Waldstein, and so-called Moonlight, to chamber monuments such as the late quartets. For listeners and performers, the stakes are interpretive and historical. We must navigate an evolving style shaped under the extraordinary constraint of hearing loss. And we must reconcile the public mythology with the documented record, including conversation books, patronage letters, and surviving manuscripts.
And I think it also matters because his career shows how adversity can redirect, but not silence, creativity, which feels, relevant to anyone who makes things.
Before we get to the complexities, some anchor points. The secure document is the baptism. December 1770, Bonn. Death followed in March 1827, Vienna. His first advertised public performance was in March 1778. His father, with creative bookkeeping, stated the boy was 6 when he was in fact 7. He moved to Vienna in 1792, studied with Haydn, counterpoint with Albrechtsberger, vocal style with Salieri, and soon built a reputation as a formidable pianist and improviser. Around 1798, the hearing trouble begins, likely with severe tinnitus, a condition that worsened. Yet contrary to the usual shorthand, he was not totally deaf in an absolute sense, even late. In 1802 at Heiligenstadt, he penned a testament of despair and resolve. And from that crisis, we can infer a pivot to the scale and ambition of the middle period. The Eroica Symphony, composed 1803 to 1804, recalibrated what a symphony could encompass. And despite initial bewilderment, it announced a new horizon. The narrative continues. The colossal 1808 concert unveiled the Fifth and Sixth Symphonies, the Fourth Piano Concerto, and the Choral Fantasy. It was under-rehearsed but historically decisive. Patronage held him in Vienna in 1809, when Archduke Rudolph and others pledged a pension rather than see him depart. And by 1824 he premiered the Ninth Symphony with its choral finale. Caroline Unger famously turned him to witness the ovation he could not hear. 3 years later, Vienna mourned him in a funeral that drew about 10,000 people.
I'm curious about one detail that always surprises me. Is it true he was, not great at basic arithmetic, even though his musical structures are so, mathematically elegant?
Indeed. In everyday calculations, he reportedly resorted to repeated addition in place of multiplication. As a mathematician by training, I find this both alarming and oddly comforting. It reminds us that cognitive domains specialize. The numbers in his music emerge from oral architecture and contrapuntal logic, not from facility with schoolroom products and quotients. Speaking of adaptation, a brief personal note. What I admire most is not stoicism as performance, but process. When performance became untenable, he built rituals of work around conversation books, ear trumpets, and a stabilizing circle of patrons and helpers. One thinks of Archduke Rudolph, or the practical support of Nanette Streicher. Necessity did not narrow the art, it concentrated it. Let's proceed to the next point. 3 questions will organize our deeper dive. First, the historical impact. Second, a counterfactual scenario concerning his hearing. Third, ongoing debates, including the identity of the so-called immortal beloved. Question 1. Historical impact. In symphonic terms, the eroica enlarged duration and argument. The fifth compressed rhetoric into elemental motive and fate-knocking pulse. The seventh distilled rhythmic vitality, and the ninth fused symphonic and vocal forms on a major scale for the first time. Chamber music followed suit. The Razumovsky quartets opened texture and scope. The late quartets interrogated harmony and form with almost laboratory intensity. The Grosse Fuge, initially a finale to Opus 130, and then published separately as Opus 133, remains both forbidding and inexhaustible. For the keyboard, consider the Hammerklavier Sonata, whose fugue and breadth set a summit so elevated that even Liszt waited until 1836 to give its first public performance. And the Diabelli variations, which transform a modest waltz into a compendium of styles and techniques. Sacred music is no outlier. The Missa Solemnis seeks, as its inscription has it, to move from the heart to the heart, conveying a spiritual seriousness that coexists with Enlightenment rationalism in Beethoven's worldview.
Can we say that patronage shaped this impact too? Without Archduke Rudolph or Prince Lobkowitz, we might not have some of these works at all.
It is crucial to understand that patronage and impact were mutually reinforcing. Early dedications to Lichnowsky and Lobkowitz created conditions for the Opus 1 trios and the Opus 18 quartets. The 1809 pension from Rudolf Kinsky and Lobkowitz kept him in Vienna. Later, Prince Galitzин's commission catalyzed the late quartets. Internationally, a Broadwood piano in 1818 and the Philharmonic Society of London's commission in 1822 further anchored his late achievements. Structural innovation does not materialize ex nihilo. It requires time, materials, and a social buffer against market volatility.
I'm curious about the downstream influence. If we look at the 19th century, how did composers respond to these transformations? Was it imitation, or more like productive anxiety?
Both. We observe emulation of techniques such as motivic development and cyclic integration. And we also observe resistance. The so-called anxiety of influence is a fair lens. Composers grappled with the ninth's choral precedent and the late quartet's density. Pianists confronted the hammerklavier's demands. The point is not that they copied, but that Beethoven provided a model for how to expand expressive range within, and sometimes beyond, inherited classical structures. The ripple effects define much of 19th century musical ambition. Question 2. Counterfactual analysis. What if Beethoven had not lost his hearing? We must proceed cautiously here. The record shows that as hearing declined, public performance diminished. Conversation books replaced speech, and compositional focus deepened on structural and contrapuntal problems, well suited to the desk rather than the stage. Absent hearing loss, one plausible scenario features a longer dual career as virtuoso and composer, with more concertos and display pieces tailored to his own playing.
What if we thought about it like this? Without the Heiligenstadt crisis, would the so-called heroic period still look, heroic? Or would it be more incremental?
The Heiligenstadt Testament is a hinge. It articulates despair over deafness and the decision to live for art. It is reasonable to infer that this concentrated his ambition into the scale and dramatic reach we associate with the Eroica and the Fifth. Had his hearing remained stable, he might have maintained a more public-facing profile, improvising and premiering his own concertos, perhaps at the expense of some of the inward, experimental turn that culminated in the late quartets and the Diabelli variations. That said, war, patronage, and personality would still have pressed him toward innovation. Genius is not a function of a single variable.
So basically, the absence of hearing loss might have shifted the portfolio of works, but not eliminated the drive to expand form. And maybe the balance would tilt toward performance-centered pieces.
Yes. In simpler terms, the laboratory might have had a larger concert hall attached. But the core investigator, as it were, remains the same. Question 3. Ongoing debates. The immortal beloved letter written in 1812 during his time at Teplitz is unsigned and unsent. It contains no explicit name. Thus the field remains contested. Maynard Solomon argued for Anthony Brentano on the basis of itinerary alignments and circumstantial intimacy. Other candidates include Julie Guicciardi, Teresa Malfatti, Anna Maria Erdödy, and Josephine Brunswick. The written record does not deliver a definitive verdict.
Can we maybe now look at what counts as compelling evidence for each? Like, what are the strongest points and where do they fail?
Briefly, for Anthony Brentano, proponents cite travel patterns intersecting with Beethoven's in 1812 and testimony about closeness. Detractors note the absence of an explicit naming and question whether the emotional tenor fits. For Josephine Brunswick, advocates emphasize a sustained, complicated attachment around 1801 onward. Skeptics point to gaps in chronology. Guicciardi and Malfatti are often considered less likely due to social and documentary constraints. Erdödy remains plausible as a trusted intimate, but lacks conclusive textual anchors. Speculation that Beethoven fathered Antony's son Karl Joseph has surfaced, yet there is no proof. The hypothesis remains unverified. It is worth noting that some early narratives lean on Anton Schindler's authority. However, his reliability is disputed in several particulars. For method's sake, we therefore privilege primary materials, letters, conversation books, dated itineraries, and maintain agnosticism where evidence is ambiguous. Further archival work could yet clarify, but the odds favor a managed uncertainty rather than a courtroom revelation.
Maybe that's something we can come back to later. I often think the mystery, while frustrating, also keeps attention on the music itself, which is the durable thing.
To summarize, we defined Beethoven as the pivotal figure between classical and romantic practice. We traced a life from Bonn to Vienna, from salon virtuosity to the architectural intensities of the symphony, quartet, and sonata. And we considered three questions. First, the historical impact, in which expanded forms and a new expressive ambition reshaped 19th century horizons. Second, the counterfactual of hearing, which likely would have shifted his output without erasing his drive to innovate. Third, the immortal beloved debate, where evidentiary modesty remains the only honest posture. For further study, I commend the late quartets, Opus 127, 130 with the separate grosse fugue, 131, 132, and 135, alongside the Diabelli variations and the Missa Solemnis. These works are not merely impressive, they are durable companions for serious listening. In conclusion, thank you for joining us. This then completes our present analysis.
Thank you, Professor. And thanks to everyone listening. So, I guess that kind of sums it up.